Cannabis industry mandates to stay union neutral come up short. Published today by Parker Perfoy. 8 states require or encourage labor peace agreements, and union leaders say enforcement so far hasn't been sufficient. As more states legalize marijuana, unions are crying foul over loopholes and a lack of enforcement that has kept state-backed labor peace deals from delivering the promised boon of organizing the industry. Out of the 25 states that have made recreational marijuana distribution legal, 8 have laws that either require or incentivize employers to sign labor peace agreements. Several other states, including Oregon and Massachusetts, are considering such measures either in legislation or ballot initiatives. Only a few states have, with LPAs, or labor peace agreements, in place, including California and New Jersey, have issued penalties against employers for violating it, like when companies made deals with fake unions. This low enforcement contrasts with labor leaders reporting violations in the field. Such peace agreements typically require employers to stay neutral on unionization and allow labor organizations access to the workplace, said Esta Bigler, director of Cornell University's Labor and Employment Law Program and co-chair of the Cannabis Workforce Initiative. In turn, unions usually agree not to call a strike. This doesn't mean you have to collective bargaining agreement. It doesn't mean your workers are going to unionize, Bigler said. It only means that workers have more space to decide what they want without fear or retaliation from their employer. Robert Solomon, an economics professor at University of California, Irvine, said the states have to step up their enforcement for the LPAs to have the desired effect. Anything that's going to have an impact on workers will have to come through regulation and enforcement of regulation, or with goodwill on both sides, he said. The whole idea of an LPA is to have goodwill on both sides, and labor management hasn't always operated from that place. Inconsistent results. LPAs are necessary to provide stability in an industry that's still finding its footing, said Jim Araby, the strategic campaign manager for United Food and Commercial Worker Union Local 5 in San Francisco. We wanted to create ongoing standards for the industry, and we knew that we had to be established from the very beginning, said Araby, who served on a 2014 California State Task Force to help legalize medical marijuana. There are a few times in history where you have labor and businesses working together to create an industry. So since we helped bring this about on the legal side, we wanted to make sure we were setting up workers for success. California law now requires an employer in the cannabis industry with more than 20 full-time workers to have and maintain a peace agreement with a bona fide union in order to get a license. The law also says employers need to fulfill the requirements with a notarized statement saying they will enter into an agreement. But Araby said results have been conclusive. You can get a license and just never actually sign the peace agreement, he said. There are some companies that we have who really strong relationships with, but the overall effectiveness of the peace agreements, I'd give it an incomplete. Room to grow. Matthew Lee, general counsel for California's Department of Cannabis Control, says unions and workers can file complaints with the state's Agricultural Labor Relations Board if they believe an employer is violating the law. The ALRB is tasked with enforcing the state's agricultural labor laws, which include the marijuana industry. Lee said the policy has room to grow. On the face of the statute, he said whether or how employers need to get into an LPA after submitting a notarized statement, and, quote, how we follow up on that is not immediately obvious, unquote. So as we look at ways to further refine the state's labor peace agreement requirements, I suspect that's an issue worth looking at, he said. Jim Gilco, president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Local 777 in Illinois, said unions are also facing a similar issue. Illinois doesn't require LPAs, but instead gives employers in the cannabis industry more points on the licensing process if they have an agreement. Companies vying for a license get points that contribute to their applications, including those for having local ownership, giving back to the community, or having an LPA. Businesses with the most points will be granted licenses first. There's just no enforcement, he said. I've seen so many cases where companies sign the labor peace agreement and then do whatever they want. We prefer to build our campaign from the ground up so we have strong backing before going to an LPA. William Bogat, get it, Bogat, co-chair of Fox Rothschild's Cannabis Law Practice, said his clients in states with LPA mandates are typically eager to enter into the deals so they can get their licenses, but employers should be wise to examine the details of the agreement and the unions involved before signing, he said. Don't just sign with the first union that comes along. Not all unions are created equal, Bogat said. You want to pick ones that have prior experience in the industry and establish themselves a little bit. Bogus unions. Among the few enforcement actions the states have undertaken, New Jersey's Cannabis Regulation Commission in July 2023 ordered Columbia Care to sign and maintain its LPA with the Teamsters Union or risk facing fines starting at $50,000. And the California ALRB has issued only 2 decisions related to peace agreements, both targeting illegitimate, bogus unions that have no intention of representing or organizing workers. Unions have long accused cannabis businesses of creating or turning to the fake unions to make it look like they're complying with the licensing requirements. In July and October, the ALRB found that the Professional Technical Union Local 33 and the National Agricultural Workers Union weren't actually unions. ProTech and NAWU have signed over 20 peace agreements with some of the biggest companies in the state, including Cannabis, Glasshouse Brands, and Herbal. Herbal's not here. Update your reporting. Yet ProTech failed to respond to basic inquiries about the LPA it had signed with the Palm Springs dispensary and has no offices or representatives based in California, the board said. NAWU also failed to sign one with a bona fide union or risk losing their license. These decisions followed years of pressure on the ALRB to take action against fake unions, ARB said. Employers have always tried to find ways around regulation, and it's kind of like whack-a-mole because there's plenty of fake unions out there, he said. So, this is Yarrow Kubrin. I'm going to hold fire. I want to hear what my other esteemed panelists and guests want to say and have to think about my long-winded article today.
I just have to say that I think unions don't deliver enough of what they should for cannabis companies, and cannabis companies pay them way too much money. So I am not pro-union when it comes with any cannabis company, with any of these unions. And Dale, to your point earlier, I'm not in favor of the police unions either.
You saying all cannabis unions, Jason, or are you just saying the ones that you've encountered?
Until I encounter one that I think that makes sense and is actually doing a value for their unionites. Yeah, all of them, blanket.
Well, I represent companies that are faced with this conundrum. Once you get to 20 employees, you got to have an LBA signed and at least on file with the local permitting and the state organizations. But in my background, my grandfather was a Teamster, so I'm really not looking into crossing, picket lines and button heads with organized labor. But the company he worked for was a large company. Mm-hmm. My other grandfather owned small businesses, and he couldn't afford to pay much more than minimum wage and keep things running. So in between that, I deal with companies who are scrambling just to pay the bills. What they're afraid is if they lose control of their employees' wages, like tends to happen when unions come in, they want to be in a driver's seat to get wages and benefits, which cost the company money. And they're looking for ways to get out of that. And there are a lot of creative loopholes you can find. I move them into management companies. I don't like plant-touching businesses to have a lot of employees because of 280E. So there's a benefit to staying away from these LPAs, taking effect. But there isn't a good answer right now, because even if you have 100 employees, that doesn't mean you're making very much money in this industry right now. And that's the conundrum you're putting a business into. They want to control their bottom line, and they're afraid that the unions will take control of that away from them. Many of them can't afford it. So the loopholes are there, and they're going to look for them. Mm-hmm. That's just the reality I deal with on a daily here.
Yeah, there's got to be a cutoff. Because smaller businesses, from what I've seen, both in mainstream and in cannabis, they don't really benefit as much from them. But there's large businesses like True Leave in Massachusetts. They would 100% have benefited from a union in that situation. And a lot of the workers would have been protected. Unfortunate event went down. They would have been protected in that case. And these cannabis companies, especially because it's still federally illegal, they're doing a lot of stuff, skirting rules that regular companies are not doing, and people are just not protected, and they're getting caught up in the hype of the cannabis industry, want to get a job in the industry, and it pays a little bit better than regular jobs, but you're not protected, and these companies are just their companies. No matter what Mitt Romney tries to say, and no matter what it's federally classified as a quote person, they're not people. The purpose of a company, purpose of a corporation is to make money, not to protect you and not to have your best interests in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my take, man.
So both my parents were the shop stewards for their union. Both my parents put in decades of service with local government, my mom with federal government. I recognize that unions in this country are a byproduct of not having worker protections. And I recognize that over the last 40 or 50 years, there has been a concerted effort to diminish the influence and participation in unions. And if unions want to have a place in regulated cannabis, then they need to step on the necks of politicians and policymakers and demonstrate their contribution to the industry first by helping to enact tax reform. Because until the taxes are lowered, there's no room on the pie chart for the cost of unions, no matter what the benefit to employees are, because there's nothing left. And so I think we have this chicken and the egg thing. Like, unions want to have membership and want to have dues, want to have influence, and want to have a position at the table in order to flex that political power. And the industry says, well, if you've got this political power, flex it now so we can get some tax relief so there's room for you guys to eat. And I think the other thing that's challenging, and I know Jim Araby, I got nothing against the guy. Hey, he wrote me a letter of support when I went after my permit in San Francisco. So thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Little social equity guy like myself always appreciates a nice letter with that kind of logo at the bottom.
Did you just call yourself a little guy?
Support.
You just called yourself a little guy.
Just a small fish in a big pond, swimming around like a little goldfish.
Yarrow's all about that socialist equity. He would be pro union, right, Jason?
Exactly.
but let me criticize the union's attempts to participate in the industry for a second here in California, at least. And also, I think in New York, but New York, again, I don't want to beat up on the redheaded stepchild. Unions have focused too much on unionizing retail workers and not at all on farm workers and industrial workers. And what's challenging for me about that is that we know that the highest percentage of occupational injuries and accidents are in industrialized settings, warehouses. And so if you want to provide worker benefit, worker protections is the obvious low-hanging fruit. And I don't see attempts at unionizing industrial cannabis workers and agricultural cannabis workers. And when you need to harvest something and bud rot is in and the rain is coming and you need to get that off the vine and you need to have everybody there and working overtime and hopefully well caffeinated and well illuminated and well ventilated and well rested, it seems to me that the unions are really missing out on an opportunity to provide a union benefit across the entire supply chain. And with that, maybe ingratiate themselves into the industry. But again, at the end of the day, until they can help with tax reform, I don't see how there's any room for them.
Can I ask the experts here, what union in marijuana would you trust, Jason?
Absolutely none of them.
Scam.
None of them.
The only union I ever see fighting for anybody is the police union. Every other union I've seen collects money and does absolutely nothing.
Yep, they
do. They fight for people.
They fight for people.
They do, and they've raised a lot of awareness nationwide. And I know that on the East Coast, specifically in New York and New Jersey, they're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to get people what they want, to get the actual cannabis community what they want. Obviously, it hasn't all panned out there, so we don't know how the end result is going to look. But we have had a lot of scam unions out here in not just Los Angeles, in California. We've reported on them. It's unfortunate. And when you're dealing with a developing system, you're going to have a lot of people out there that are scamming folks, unfortunately. But,
I mean, you've never heard of the Terpene Teamsters? That's an amazing union.
Oh boy!
Right. But y'all, you brought up an excellent point about the agricultural workers, and that's in mainstream America too. I always say the cannabis industry is a microcosm of the greater United States of America. I'm going up. I'm driving up the 405. This parking lot of a freeway right now up to Ventura right now. Before I get to Ventura, I'm gonna see all of these strawberry fields and everything, and all these poor workers are undocumented on the side of the road. They're not unionized, but they're supplying America with the greatest produce in the world.
By
Right?
California strawberries.
It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue across the board. So I think you brought up a really, really great point there.
If we think about the history of organized labor in California specifically, because we may not be the manufacturing powerhouse of the country, but we have been the agricultural powerhouse in many respects of the world. Thank you very much.
Right.
Somebody drop a mic. When we think about the history of organized labor in California, you can't think about that without thinking about Cesar Chavez and the grape workers. Yeah. And I live in the wine country, and I love what the wine industry does in terms of tourism and making this a destination and how fun it is to go. Come on, who doesn't like a charcuterie plate with a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc on the side while you're bouncing around West County, right? This is a beautiful place to live.
Oh, yes, he does.
She went to Napa, not Sonoma. I'm not sure that we would have had her. But anyway, when I think about organized labor in California, our tourism, some of our important agricultural products, it all folds into this conversation. And so if the unions aren't going after farm workers, and if this is an agricultural product, I have to stop and scratch my head and wonder why not.
Exactly. Yeah. Why not? And we should be focused on weed for the people, you guys. And on that, we're going to go to a commercial. We're going to be right back.